The dust had barely settled on Zachary Emmett's boots when he saw her kneeling in the dirt outside the abandoned homestead, her hands working the dry New Mexico soil, as if coaxing life from death itself. It was the spring of 1878 in Santa Fe, and nothing about the landscape suggested that roses could survive here. Yet there she was, planting them anyway with a determination that made his chest tighten in a way he had not felt in years. Zachary had ridden into town 3 days prior, looking for ranch work and a place to forget the war that still haunted his dreams. At 28, he had lived more lifetimes than most men twice his age, and his heart had grown as barren as the desert stretching beyond the Rio Grande. He had planned to ride past the old Martinez property without a second glance, but the sight of a woman in a faded blue dress, her dark blonde hair escaping from beneath a wide-brimmed hat, stopped him cold. He dismounted from his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Juniper, and approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. As he drew closer, he could see the careful way she patted the earth around each bare root, whispering something he could not quite hear. "Morning, miss," he said, keeping his voice low and respectful. She looked up, and he found himself staring into the clearest blue eyes he had ever seen. Her face was sun-touched and honest, with fine lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of laughter rather than worry. She could not have been more than 24 or 25, he guessed, and there was something about the set of her jaw that told him she was not easily discouraged. "Good morning," she replied, sitting back on her heels and wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her skin. "You lost, Cowboy?" "No, madam. Just passing through and saw you working. This is mighty dry land for roses." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "That is what everyone keeps telling me, but I figure if I can survive out here, so can they." He found himself smiling back, an unfamiliar sensation that felt rusty with disuse. "You might have a point. Name is Zachary Emmett. Most folks call me Zach." "Beatrice Fuller," she said, extending a dirt-covered hand. "Most folks call me Bea." He shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "You live here alone, Miss Fuller?" Her expression shifted slightly, a shadow passing over her features. "I do now. My father passed 6 months back. Left me this land and not much else. But it is mine, and I intend to make something of it." Zachary looked at the small adobe house behind her, noting the repairs it needed and the general state of disrepair around the property. "That is a tall order for one person." "Good thing I am not afraid of tall orders," Bea said, turning back to her roses. "These were my mother's favorite. She died when I was 12, and I have been carrying these cuttings with me ever since, waiting for the right place to plant them. Figure if there is ever going to be a right time, it is now." Something in her words resonated deep within Zachary's chest. He understood about carrying things, about waiting for the right moment that might never come. He had been carrying his own burdens for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to set them down. "You need help with anything around here?" The words were out of his mouth before he could think better of them. Bea looked up at him with surprise. "You offering?" "I am between jobs at the moment. Could use some work, and it looks like you could use some help." She studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face as if trying to read his intentions. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "I cannot pay much. Room and board and what little cash I can spare. That will do fine." And just like that, Zachary Emmett found himself staying at the Fuller property, fixing fences and patching the roof while Bea tended her roses and the small vegetable garden she was trying to establish. The work was hard and honest, and for the first time since the war, he found himself sleeping through the night without nightmares. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Zachary would rise with the sun and tend to the heavier chores while Bea prepared breakfast. They would eat together on the small porch, watching the light change across the desert landscape, and then set about their separate tasks. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk, sharing stories of their pasts in small, careful doses. He learned that Bea had grown up in Missouri, that her father had moved them west after her mother died, chasing the promise of land and a fresh start. She had spent her adolescence learning to be tough, to survive in a world that did not make allowances for gentle hearts. But despite everything, she had held onto her mother's roses, that small piece of softness she refused to let the world take from her. Zachary told her about his own family, about the farm in Tennessee where he had grown up, and the war that had torn everything apart. He did not tell her about the things he had seen, the things he had done, but she seemed to understand the weight of what he carried anyway. "You know what I think," Bea said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I think people are like my roses. We can survive in the harshest places if we have the right care, if someone believes in us enough to help us put down roots." Zachary looked at her profile in the gathering darkness, the way the last light caught in her hair, and felt something shift inside him. It was a dangerous feeling, this warmth spreading through his chest, this sense that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than the hollow man he had become. "Maybe you are right," he said quietly. As the weeks passed, Zachary found himself looking for excuses to be near Bea, to hear her laugh or see the way her face lit up when she discovered a new green shoot emerging from the soil. Her roses were beginning to take hold, small signs of life appearing on the previously bare stems. It seemed like a miracle, and Zachary could not help but wonder if something similar was happening inside his own chest. One afternoon, nearly 2 months after his arrival, Zachary was in the barn repairing a broken stall door when he heard horses approaching. He set down his tools and walked outside to find 3 men on horseback, their faces hard and unfriendly. Bea had been working in the garden, but she stood now, her posture tense. "Miss Fuller," the lead rider said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. He was a thick-set man with a gray beard and cold eyes. "I am here on behalf of Mr. Cyrus Thornton. He wanted me to remind you that his offer on this property still stands." "And my answer still stands too, Mr. Garrett," Bea replied, her voice steady despite the tremor Zachary could see in her hands. "This land is not for sale." Garrett's expression hardened. "Now, Miss Fuller, you need to be reasonable. A woman alone out here, it is not safe. And Mr. Thornton is offering a fair price." I said no. Zachary moved to stand beside Bea, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. "I believe the lady has made herself clear." Garrett's eyes shifted to Zachary, assessing. "And who might you be?" "Someone who works here." Someone who would take it poorly if Miss Fuller were bothered on her own property. The tension stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Garrett smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Thornton is a patient man, but his patience is not infinite. You would do well to remember that, Miss Fuller." The 3 men turned their horses and rode away, leaving dust hanging in the air. Bea let out a breath she had been holding, and Zachary saw her hands were shaking. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "Since right after my father died." "Cyrus Thornton owns half the land around Santa Fe, and he wants this property to connect 2 of his parcels. He has been pressuring me to sell, but this is my home. I am not giving it up." Zachary felt a surge of protective anger. "He cannot force you." "Maybe not legally, but men like Thornton have ways of making life difficult." She looked up at him, and he saw fear mixed with determination in her eyes. "I am not leaving, Zach. I will not let him take this from me." "Then I am not going anywhere either." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Bea reached out and touched his arm, a brief contact that sent warmth racing through him. "Thank you," she whispered. After that day, something changed between them. The careful distance they had maintained began to dissolve, replaced by a growing closeness that felt as natural as breathing. Zachary found himself sharing things he had never told anyone, and Bea opened up about her fears and dreams in return. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Bea showed him the first bloom on her roses. It was a perfect pale pink flower, delicate and beautiful against the harsh landscape. "Look," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "It worked. They are actually growing." Zachary studied the flower, then looked at Bea's radiant face. "You never doubted they would." "I doubted plenty," she admitted. "But I have learned that sometimes you have to act like you believe in something before you actually do. Fake it until it becomes real." "Is that what you are doing with this place? With staying here?" She turned to face him fully, and in the fading light her eyes were luminous. "At first, maybe, but not anymore. This feels real now. It feels like home." She paused, then added softly, "You feel real too." Zachary's heart hammered in his chest. He had spent so long building walls around himself, convinced that he did not deserve happiness or connection. But Bea had somehow slipped past those defenses, bringing light into the dark corners of his soul. "Bea, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I came to Santa Fe trying to outrun my past. I did not think I had anything left inside me worth giving to anyone. But these past months with you, they have changed me. You have changed me." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "You changed me too. Before you came, I was just trying to survive. Now I am actually living." He wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly his hands shook with the restraint it took not to pull her into his arms. But he needed to be sure, needed to know she felt the same way. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I think I have been since the day I saw you planting those roses." Bea's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good, because I have been falling in love with you too. Watching you work, seeing how gentle you are with the animals, the way you listen when I talk like my words actually matter. You make me feel seen, Zach. You make me feel like I can do anything." This time he did not hold back. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, pouring all the emotion he had been holding inside into that connection. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck as if she never wanted to let go. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I want to stay here with you, not just as a hired hand but as a partner, as your husband if you will have me." Bea laughed, the sound joyful and free. "That might be the easiest question anyone has ever asked me." "Yes, Zachary Emmett. Yes, I will marry you." They held each other as the stars emerged overhead, making plans for their future, but their happiness was short-lived. 3 days later, Zachary was out checking the fences when he saw smoke rising from the direction of the house. His heart lurched as he spurred Juniper into a gallop, racing back to find flames licking at the corner of the barn. Bea was already there with buckets of water, desperately trying to contain the blaze. Zachary jumped down and joined her, and together they managed to put out the fire before it spread to the house. But the damage was done. Part of the barn was destroyed, and several of their tools were ruined. "This was not an accident," Bea said, her face smudged with soot and tears of frustration. "Look." She pointed to an oil-soaked rag that had been tucked into the corner where the fire started. Someone had deliberately set this fire. Zachary felt rage building inside him, cold and focused. "Thornton. We do not know that for sure. Who else?" He is trying to force you out, and he is not being subtle about it. Bea sank down onto the ground, exhaustion and despair washing over her. Maybe I should just sell. Maybe it is not worth all this trouble. Zachary knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. Do not let him win. Do not let him take away what you have built here. But what if he hurts you? What if something worse happens? Then we will deal with it together. But we are not running, and we are not giving up. You taught me that when you planted those roses. You showed me that beautiful things can grow in the hardest places, but only if we are brave enough to tend them. Bea looked at him, and he saw her strength returning, that core of steel that had drawn him to her in the first place. You are right. This is our home, and we are staying. The next morning, they rode into Santa Fe together to speak with the sheriff. Martin Hayes was a weathered man in his 50s who listened to their story with a grave expression. I understand your concerns, Miss Fuller, but without proof that Thornton was involved, there is not much I can do. I can send someone to patrol your area more regularly, but that is about it. So we are just supposed to wait until he tries something else, Zachary demanded. I am sorry, son. My hands are tied without evidence. They left the sheriff's office frustrated but not defeated. As they walked down the main street, Bea stopped suddenly, her attention caught by a notice posted outside the general store. Look at this, she said. There is a town meeting next week about land disputes and property rights. Thornton will be there, along with the territorial governor's representative. Zachary read the notice, an idea forming. What if we went public with this? If Thornton is operating in the shadows, maybe bringing everything into the light will stop him. Or it could make him more dangerous. Either way, it is better than sitting around waiting for his next move. Over the next week, they prepared their case, gathering documentation of the harassment and the evidence of the barn fire. They also spoke with other small landowners in the area, and they were not surprised to learn that several others had experienced similar pressure from Thornton. The night before the meeting, Zachary and Bea stood together looking at her roses. They were thriving now, several blooms opening in the evening air, their sweet scent mixing with the desert sage. No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know something, Bea said. Meeting you, falling in love with you, it has been the best thing that ever happened to me. Even if we lose this land, I will not lose you. Zachary pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. You are not going to lose me, and we are not going to lose this land. Tomorrow we fight. The town meeting was held in the largest building in Santa Fe, a hall usually reserved for dances and community gatherings. By the time Zachary and Bea arrived, it was already crowded with ranchers, farmers, and townspeople. Cyrus Thornton sat near the front, a large man with silver hair and an expensive suit that set him apart from the working folks around him. The territorial representative, a dignified man named William Ashford, called the meeting to order and invited anyone with concerns to come forward. Several people spoke about various land disputes and water rights, and then Bea stood up. Zachary watched her walk to the front of the room, her head held high despite the trembling he could see in her hands. She was wearing her best dress, a simple green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a neat braid. She looked strong and beautiful and utterly unbreakable. My name is Beatrice Fuller, she began, her voice clear and steady. I own a small property just outside town, land that my father worked for years before he passed. Since his death, I have been repeatedly pressured to sell this property to Mr. Cyrus Thornton. When I refused, strange things started happening. Fences were cut, livestock spooked, and last week, someone deliberately set fire to my barn. A murmur ran through the crowd. Thornton stood up, his face red with indignation. This is slander. I have made legitimate business offers to Miss Fuller, but I have never engaged in intimidation or vandalism." "Then explain why your foreman, Mr. Garrett, came to my property with threats," Bea countered. "Explain why every incident coincided with my rejection of your offers." "Coincidence," Thornton said dismissively. "You are a woman alone, Miss Fuller. Perhaps you are simply overwhelmed and looking for someone to blame for your difficulties." The condescension in his tone made Zachary's blood boil, but before he could stand, another voice rang out. "She is not alone." An older man stood up, a rancher Zachary recognized from the general store. "I am Samuel Wright, and I have had similar experiences with Mr. Thornton. When I would not sell, my water supply was mysteriously poisoned. When I complained, I was told it was probably just natural contamination." Another woman stood. "My husband and I refused to sell our land 3 years ago. A week later, our house burned down. We could not prove anything, but we lost everything. We had no choice but to sell to Thornton at a fraction of what our property was worth." More voices joined in, a chorus of similar stories. The pattern was clear, and the crowd's mood shifted from curious to angry. William Ashford listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. Thornton's composure began to crack. "These are all lies, fabrications from people who have failed at their own endeavors and want someone to blame. Actually, I think we need to investigate these allegations thoroughly," Ashford said. "Mr. Thornton, I will need a full accounting of your land acquisitions over the past 5 years, including the circumstances of each purchase. Sheriff Hayes, I want you to look into each of these incidents. If there is a pattern of intimidation and arson, the people responsible will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The meeting ended with Thornton storming out, his face thunderous. Zachary made his way to Bea, who was surrounded by people thanking her for speaking up. When she finally broke free, she fell into his arms, exhausted but triumphant. "You were incredible," he murmured into her hair. "I was terrified. You did not show it." Over the next few weeks, the investigation proceeded. Sheriff Hayes, now taking the matter seriously, discovered that several men connected to Thornton had been seen near properties shortly before incidents occurred. While they could not prove Thornton himself had ordered the acts, enough doubt was cast on his business practices that the territorial governor's office launched a formal inquiry. Faced with potential criminal charges and the damage to his reputation, Thornton withdrew his offer on Bea's land and ceased his harassment of other small landowners. It was not a perfect victory, but it was enough. With the threat lifted, Zachary and Bea could finally focus on their future together. They were married on a warm June day in 1878 in a small ceremony at the Santa Fe Church. Bea wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Zachary wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. The few friends they had made in town attended, along with some of the landowners who had stood up at the meeting. As they exchanged vows, Zachary looked into Bea's eyes and saw his entire future reflected back at him. This woman, who had planted roses in barren soil and refused to give up on either the land or on him, was now his wife. The realization filled him with a joy so profound it was almost painful. "I love you," he whispered as they sealed their marriage with a kiss. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Forever." They held a small reception at their property, and as the sun set and their guests danced and celebrated, Zachary led Bea to the rose garden she had created. The plants were flourishing now, full of blooms that perfumed the evening air. "Remember the day I first saw you here?" Zachary asked, pulling her close. "How could I forget? You looked so lost standing there with your horse." "I was lost, but you found me. You and these roses." Bea smiled up at him, her face glowing in the fading light. We found each other. And we are going to build something beautiful here, Zach. I can feel it." She was right. Over the next few years, they transformed the property into a thriving homestead. Zachary proved to be not just a skilled ranch hand, but also an innovative thinker, finding ways to irrigate their land and make the most of the challenging environment. Bea's roses became famous in Santa Fe, and people would come from miles around to see the impossible garden she had created in the desert. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. There were hard times, of course. Droughts that tested their resolve, harsh winters that killed crops, and the endless challenge of making a living from unforgiving land. But they faced it all together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing season. In the spring of 1880, Bea discovered she was pregnant. Zachary was overcome with emotion when she told him, joy mixed with fear at the responsibility of bringing a child into the world. But Bea took his face in her hands and smiled. "We will be good parents," she said. "We have so much love to give." Their son was born in December of that year, during the first real snowfall of winter. They named him Thomas, after Bea's father, and from the moment Zachary held the tiny, squalling bundle in his arms, he knew his heart had expanded in ways he never thought possible. "He is perfect," Zachary said, tears streaming down his face as he looked from his son to his wife. "We made him," Bea said, exhausted but radiant. "We made this beautiful life." Thomas grew quickly, a sturdy boy with his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair. Zachary taught him to ride almost before he could walk, and Bea made sure he learned his letters and numbers. The boy was curious about everything, always asking questions and exploring. When Thomas was 3, Bea became pregnant again, and in the summer of 1884 they welcomed a daughter they named Rose, after the flowers that had brought Zachary and Bea together. Rose was a quieter child than her brother, but she had her mother's determination and her father's gentle heart. The years rolled by, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. Zachary's nightmares about the war faded, replaced by dreams of the future. He and Bea expanded their property, adding more livestock and even starting a small orchard. The roses Bea had planted that first spring grew into massive bushes that covered an entire section of the property, a living testament to her faith and perseverance. Other families moved into the area, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. Some succeeded, some failed, but Zachary and Bea tried to help where they could, remembering how hard those early years had been. They became pillars of the small community that grew up around Santa Fe, known for their generosity and their solid marriage. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Bea back to the spot where he had first seen her planting roses. The garden had grown exponentially, but he had kept that original section exactly as it was, the first roses she had planted still blooming every spring. "Do you remember what you told me that first day?" Zachary asked, his arms wrapped around her from behind as they looked at the flowers. "I said a lot of things that day. You told me that if you could survive out here, so could the roses." Bea leaned back against him, and I was right. "You were right about a lot of things. About this land, about not giving up, about me." He turned her to face him, looking into eyes that had lost none of their brightness over the years. "I was so empty when I came here, Bea. I thought I was past feeling anything, past hope or happiness. But you showed me I was wrong. You made my heart bloom again, just like you made these roses bloom." Tears shimmered in Bea's eyes. "You did the same for me. I was just going through the motions before you came, trying to honor my parents' memory but not really living. You gave me a reason to truly thrive, not just survive." They kissed, a sweet, lingering kiss that held a decade of love and partnership. When they pulled apart, they could hear Thomas and Rose playing in the distance, their laughter carried on the desert wind. "We built a good life here," Bea said. "We built a beautiful life," Zachary corrected. "And it is only going to get better." As the years continued to pass, Zachary and Bea's property became a local landmark. Their rose garden was the pride of Santa Fe, and travelers would often stop just to see the incredible sight of so many flowers thriving in the desert landscape. Bea started selling cuttings and giving gardening advice to other women in the area, sharing the knowledge she had gained through years of patient trial and error. Thomas grew into a responsible young man, tall and strong like his father, with a gift for working with horses. Rose developed her mother's green thumb and spent hours in the garden, learning the secrets of coaxing beauty from harsh soil. Zachary and Bea watched their children grow with pride, knowing that they were raising them with the values that mattered most: hard work, kindness, and the courage to plant seeds even when the ground seemed barren. In 1890, Santa Fe was changing rapidly. The railroad had come through, bringing new people and new opportunities. Some of the old ranchers sold their land to developers, and the wild frontier that Zachary and Bea had known was slowly being tamed. But their property remained, a piece of the Old West that they refused to let go of. Cyrus Thornton had left New Mexico years earlier, his reputation ruined by the investigation into his land practices. The property he had so desperately wanted to acquire from Bea had ended up in the hands of a cooperative of small farmers, a fitting end to his schemes. Occasionally, Zachary and Bea would talk about those early days, about the struggle and the fear, but mostly they focused on how far they had come. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a familiar sight after more than a decade together, Thomas rode up with news. He had been courting a young woman from town, the daughter of the blacksmith, and he wanted his parents' blessing to propose. "Of course you have our blessing," Bea said, hugging her son tightly. "She is a wonderful girl." After Thomas left, Zachary pulled Bea close. "We are getting old," he said with a smile. "Speak for yourself." "I am in my prime," he laughed, the sound rich and warm. "That you are, though I have a few more gray hairs than I did when we met. I like them. They make you look distinguished. Distinguished is just another word for old." Bea poked him playfully in the ribs. "You are only 40 now, Zachary Emmett. That is not old." "Maybe not, but it feels like a lifetime since I rode past here and saw you planting roses. It has been a lifetime, the best lifetime I could have imagined." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. The roses in the garden released their evening fragrance, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the emerging moon. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked suddenly. "Staying here fighting for this land. We could have had an easier life somewhere else." Bea turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Never. Not for one single moment. This land, this life, you and our children, it is everything I ever wanted. The struggles made it sweeter, Zach. If it had been easy, it would not have meant as much." He kissed her temple. "I feel the same way. Every hardship, every challenge, it was worth it to build this life with you." Thomas married his blacksmith's daughter, a spirited young woman named Clara, in the spring of 1891. The wedding was held on Zachary and Bea's property, under an arbor covered in roses. As Zachary watched his son take his vows, he was transported back to his own wedding day, to the moment when he had promised to love Bea for the rest of his life. It was a promise he had kept and would continue to keep. Rose, now a lovely young woman of 7, scattered flower petals as she walked down the aisle, her face solemn with the importance of her duty. Afterward, at the reception, she sought out her father. "Papa, will I get married someday too?" she asked. Zachary picked her up, even though she was getting almost too big to carry. "Someday if you want to, but not for a long time. You are my little girl. But when I do get married, will I be as happy as you and Mama?" He looked over at Bea, who was laughing with Clara and some of the other women. Even after all these years, the sight of her made his heart skip a beat. "If you find someone who loves you the way I love your mother, someone who will stand by you through good times and bad, someone who makes you want to be better than you are, then yes, you will be that happy. How will I know when I find them?" Zachary thought about that day he had seen Bea in the garden, about the instant recognition he had felt, as if his soul had known hers. "You will just know, sweetheart. When it is right, you will feel it here." He tapped her chest over her heart. A few months after the wedding, Bea began feeling unwell. At first they thought it was just a stomach ailment, but when it persisted, Zachary insisted they see the doctor in town. He rode beside her wagon, his heart heavy with worry. The doctor examined Bea thoroughly and then sat them down with a gentle smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Emmett, you are expecting." Zachary nearly fell out of his chair. "What? But we thought. We are in our 30s, we did not think." "Nature has a way of surprising us," the doctor said. "You are healthy and strong, Mrs. Emmett. There is no reason this baby should not be just fine." They rode home in stunned silence. Rose was 7 years old, Thomas was married and starting his own life. They had assumed their family was complete. But as the shock wore off, joy began to take its place. "Another baby," Bea said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Can you believe it?" Zachary reached over and covered her hand with his. "With you, I can believe anything. You have been proving the impossible possible since the day I met you." Their third child, a boy they named James, was born in early 1892. He was a small baby, coming earlier than expected, and for a few terrifying days they were not sure he would survive. But James proved to be a fighter, just like his mother, and he grew stronger with each passing week. Rose adored her baby brother, helping Bea care for him whenever she could. Thomas and Clara visited often, and the house was filled with laughter and life. Zachary, watching his expanded family gather around the dinner table, often had to stop and marvel at how much his life had changed. The boy who had ridden into Santa Fe with a barren heart and no hope for the future now had a wife he adored, 3 healthy children, and a prosperous homestead. The transformation was so complete that sometimes he had trouble remembering what it had felt like to be that lost young man. But Bea never let him forget. On quiet evenings, she would remind him of his strength, of the courage it had taken to open his heart again after so much pain. She told him that his capacity to love after everything he had been through was the most beautiful thing about him. "You could have stayed closed off," she said one night as they lay in bed, James sleeping in a cradle nearby. "You could have hidden behind your walls forever. But you chose to take a risk on me, on this life. That took more bravery than any battle." "It did not feel brave," Zachary admitted. "It felt terrifying, but you made it impossible not to love you. Good, because I have no intention of ever letting you go." As James grew from an infant to a toddler, Zachary and Bea settled into this new phase of their life. They were older parents now, more patient and perhaps more appreciative of the small moments. They had learned through experience that time moved quickly, that children grew up faster than seemed possible. Rose, at 10 years old, was already showing signs of the woman she would become. She was thoughtful and artistic, spending hours sketching the plants and animals on their property. Zachary built her a small studio space in one of the outbuildings, and she would disappear there for hours, lost in her creativity. Thomas and Clara announced that they were expecting their first child. making Zachary and Bea grandparents at the ages of 42 and 39. The baby, a girl they named Beatrice after her grandmother, was born healthy and strong in the fall of 1893. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Zachary was overwhelmed with emotion. "We started with roses," he said to Bea, who was cooing over the baby. "And now look at what has grown from those roots. A whole family tree. Our legacy," Bea said softly. "This is what we are leaving behind, not just land or money, but love, generations of love." The years rolled on, each one bringing new joys and occasional sorrows. They lost some of their original livestock to age and illness, but new animals were born to replace them. The rose garden required constant maintenance, but it remained glorious, a beacon of beauty in the rugged landscape. In 1895, Rose met a young teacher who had come to Santa Fe from back east. His name was Daniel Wright, and he was the grandson of Samuel Wright, the rancher who had stood up at the town meeting all those years ago. The connection felt right, a circle completing itself. Rose and Daniel courted for a year before he asked for her hand, and when he did, Zachary gave his blessing gladly. "You are taking my little girl," Zachary said to Daniel, trying to sound stern but failing. "I promise to take care of her, sir, to love her the way she deserves. See that you do." Because she comes from strong stock. Her mother taught her never to settle for less than she deserves. Rose's wedding in 1896 was even more elaborate than Thomas's had been. The rose garden was in full bloom, and the entire property seemed to glow with happiness. Bea cried through the entire ceremony, happy tears that she did not bother to hide. "Our baby girl is all grown up," she whispered to Zachary. "She is going to be happy," he assured her. "Daniel is a good man, I know, but it is still hard to let go. We are not letting go. We are watching her bloom, just like your roses." After Rose moved to her new home with Daniel, the house felt emptier, but James filled it with his energy. At 4 years old, he was a whirlwind of activity, always getting into things and asking endless questions. He reminded Zachary of himself as a boy, before the war, full of curiosity and joy. Bea sometimes struggled with James's energy, her body not quite as resilient as it had been when Thomas and Rose were young. But she never complained, throwing herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. One afternoon, in the summer of 1897, Zachary came home from working the far pasture to find Bea sitting in the rose garden with James asleep in her lap. She looked tired but content, her face turned up to the sun. "Is everything all right?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Everything is perfect," she said. "I was just thinking about how lucky we are, how much we have. We are lucky, but we also worked hard for this." "That too. But mostly, I think we were brave enough to believe in possibilities. You could have ridden past that day, Zach. You could have kept going and never looked back. That would have been the biggest mistake of my life." She leaned against him, careful not to wake James. "Mine too, if I had let fear win. If I had sold this land and moved back east or given up on my roses. But we both chose hope over fear, and look what grew from that choice." They sat together in the garden until James woke up, sticky and cranky from his nap. Bea laughed as she tried to wipe his face, and Zachary watched them with a fullness in his heart that never seemed to diminish. As the turn of the century approached, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. The world was changing rapidly, new inventions and ideas emerging every day. But on their little property outside Santa Fe, time seemed to move at its own pace, measured in seasons and growth rather than the ticking of clocks. Thomas and Clara had 2 more children, giving Zachary and Bea 3 grandchildren to dote on. Rose and Daniel had their first baby, a son they named Zachary in honor of his grandfather. The family gathered often, filling the house with noise and laughter. On New Year's Eve, 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Zachary and Bea stood together in their rose garden despite the winter cold. James was at a party with friends, old enough now at 7 to have his own social life. They were alone, just the two of them, under a sky full of stars. "A new century," Bea said, her breath misting in the cold air. "Can you believe it? After everything we have been through together, I can believe anything. What do you think the next century will bring?" Zachary pulled her closer, sharing his warmth. "For the world, I have no idea, but for us, more of this, more love, more family, more beauty. We will keep tending our garden and watching it grow. Until when? Until the end. And even then, what we have planted here will keep growing. In our children and grandchildren, in this land we have cared for, we will live on through all of it." Bea tilted her face up to kiss him. "I love you, Zachary Emmett. Thank you for stopping that day, for seeing me and my roses and believing in both of us. I love you too, Beatrice Emmett. Thank you for teaching me that my heart was not as barren as I thought. Thank you for showing me how to bloom." They stood together as midnight approached, counting down the final seconds of the century. When the new year arrived, they kissed, sealing their passage into the new era with the same love that had sustained them through the old one. The years after 1900 brought continued blessings. James grew into a fine young man with his father's steadiness and his mother's determination. He showed an aptitude for business and helped expand the property's operations, finding new markets for their goods and improving their techniques. Zachary and Bea aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They moved a bit slower, worked a bit less, but their devotion to each other and to the land never wavered. The rose garden remained Bea's special domain, and even as her hands grew stiff with arthritis, she continued to tend it daily. By 1910, they had 7 grandchildren, with more on the way. Their children had all built good lives, founded on the principles Zachary and Bea had modeled for them. The family remained close, gathering often for meals and celebrations. On their 32nd wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that seemed to include half of Santa Fe. People came from miles around to celebrate the couple who had become legends in their own way. Not for wealth or fame, but for the simple, powerful example of their enduring love. Standing before their friends and family, Zachary raised a glass to his wife. 32 years ago, I was a lost man with a barren heart. I thought my life was over, that I had nothing left to give or receive. Then I saw this woman planting roses in impossible soil, refusing to accept that beauty could not grow in hard places. She saved me, not by fixing me or changing me, but by loving me exactly as I was and believing I could become more. Bea, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I would live these 32 years over again in a heartbeat, every struggle and every triumph, just to end up right here with you. There was not a dry eye in the room. Bea stood and took his hand, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Zach saw me as more than just a woman trying to survive in a harsh land. He saw my dreams and helped me achieve them. Together, we built something beautiful out of dust and determination. Our life has not been easy, but it has been real and full and overflowing with love. I could not ask for anything more. They kissed, and the room erupted in applause. Later, as the party wound down and the guests departed, Zachary and Bea walked through their rose garden one more time, admiring the flowers that glowed in the moonlight. "You remember what you said that first day?" Bea asked. "You said this was mighty dry land for roses." "I was wrong about a lot of things back then. You were right to doubt. It was dry land, it still is, but we made it work anyway. Because you refuse to give up. Because we refuse to give up, she corrected. Everything we have we built together. The years continued their steady march. Zachary and Bea slowed down more, letting their children and grandchildren take on more of the work. But they remained active, involved in every aspect of the property and the family. They were the heart of the clan, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1915, as the world beyond New Mexico descended into the chaos of war, their little corner remained peaceful. James, now 23, took over most of the day-to-day operations, allowing Zachary and Bea to finally rest. They spent their days in the garden, taking long walks and entertaining the constant stream of grandchildren who came to visit. One morning in the spring of 1916, Zachary woke to find Bea already up, standing in the rose garden in her nightgown. He wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and went to join her, worried she might catch cold in the morning chill. "Bea, what are you doing out here?" he asked gently. She turned to him with a smile that took his breath away, even after all these years. "I wanted to see the sunrise with my roses. I had a dream about my mother last night. She told me the flowers were beautiful, that she was proud of what I had built." Zachary wrapped his arms around her, blanket and all. "She would be proud. You took the gift she gave you and made it into something extraordinary." "We made it extraordinary," Bea insisted. "None of this would exist without you." They stood together watching the sky lighten, the roses gradually revealing their colors as dawn broke. It was a moment of perfect peace, the kind that only comes from a life well lived and love fully given. As spring turned to summer, Bea's health began to decline. She developed a cough that would not go away, and the doctor told them her heart was growing weak. She was 63 years old, and while that was not ancient, the hard life of the frontier had taken its toll. Zachary refused to accept it at first, insisting she just needed rest and care. But Bea, always practical, knew the truth. She made him promise not to mourn too long, to keep living and tending the roses after she was gone. "I cannot promise that," Zachary said, his voice breaking. "How am I supposed to go on without you? The same way you went on before you met me, by putting one foot in front of the other, by finding purpose in each day. Our children and grandchildren need you, Zach. The roses need you. Promise me you will not give up." "I promise I will not give up on them. But Bea, you are not going anywhere. We are going to fight this." She took his hand, her grip still surprisingly strong. "I have been fighting my whole life. For this land, for our family, for our love. I am tired, my darling. If it is time for me to rest, I am ready." "I am not ready. I will never be ready to lose you." Bea lingered through the summer, growing weaker but never losing her spirit. The family gathered often, filling the house with love and laughter. She spent her good days in the rose garden, surrounded by the flowers she had coaxed from the barren earth all those years ago. On a warm evening in late August, with Zachary holding her hand and her children gathered around, Bea drew her last breath. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that matched the roses outside the window. It was peaceful, as fitting an end as anyone could hope for. Zachary's world shattered. The woman who had been his partner, his love, his reason for living was gone. He went through the motions of the funeral, accepted the condolences of friends and family. But inside he felt hollowed out, as barren as he had been when he first rode into Santa Fe 38 years ago. In the days after Bea's death, Zachary seriously considered just giving up. What was the point of going on when half of himself was missing? But then he would remember his promise to her, would see his children's worried faces or hear a grandchild's laughter, and he would find the strength to keep going. He spent hours in the rose garden, talking to Bea as if she could hear him. In his grief, He neglected other parts of the property, but the roses he tended with religious devotion. They were his connection to her, the living legacy of her faith and determination. James gently tried to get his father more involved in life again. "Mama would not want you to waste away out here," he said one day, finding Zachary sitting among the roses as the sun set. "I know what your mother would want, but knowing and doing are two different things. She loved you so much, Papa, you know that, right? And she would want you to keep living, really living, not just existing." Zachary looked at his son, seeing so much of Bea in his features. "How did you get so wise?" "I had good teachers." Slowly, painfully, Zachary began to engage with life again. He started spending more time with his grandchildren, teaching them the things Bea had taught him about gardening and patience. He worked with James to continue improving the property, making sure that what he and Bea had built would last for generations. The roses bloomed every spring, a riot of color against the New Mexico sky, and Zachary took comfort in their constancy. Some years were better than others, but the garden always came back, just as Bea had known it would. In 1920, 4 years after Bea's death, James convinced Zachary to attend a community celebration in Santa Fe. Zachary had avoided most social events since losing his wife, but he agreed to go for his son's sake. At the celebration, he was approached by the current mayor, a young man who had grown up hearing stories about Zachary and Bea. "Mr. Emmett, I have been hoping to speak with you. We are planning to create a public garden in town, and we would love to name it after your late wife. Her roses have become famous throughout New Mexico. It would be a fitting tribute." Zachary felt tears prick his eyes. Bea would have loved that. She always believed beauty should be shared. "Would you be willing to donate some cuttings from your garden? We want to make sure her roses are part of the memorial." Of course, she would be honored. The Bea Fuller Emmett Memorial Garden was dedicated in the spring of 1921. It was a beautiful space in the heart of Santa Fe, filled with roses from Bea's original plants. At the dedication ceremony, Zachary gave a speech about his wife, about her determination and vision. "My wife taught me that the greatest act of faith is planting something you may never see fully bloom," he said to the gathered crowd. "She planted roses in impossible soil because she believed in the future. She planted love in my barren heart because she believed in me." This garden stands as a testament to her faith, her hope, and her refusal to accept that beautiful things cannot grow in hard places. May it inspire all of us to plant our own seeds of hope, no matter how difficult the soil may seem. After the ceremony, Zachary felt something shift inside him. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it no longer consumed him. Bea lived on in the roses, in their children and grandchildren, in the land they had tended together. He could honor her memory by continuing to live fully, by sharing the lessons she had taught him. He threw himself into being a grandfather and great-grandfather, taking joy in the new generations that were growing up on the property he and Bea had saved. He taught them about the roses, about persistence, about love that could weather any storm. Thomas's oldest daughter, Beatrice, showed a particular affinity for the garden, and Zachary spent hours with her, passing on everything Bea had taught him. Watching young Beatrice work with the roses, her hands careful and reverent, Zachary could almost feel Bea's presence, could imagine her smiling at this continuation of her legacy. The years passed more quickly now. Zachary's hair turned completely white and his hands grew gnarled with age, but his mind remained sharp. He was there for every birth, every wedding, every major milestone in his family's life. In 1925, on what would have been his 47th wedding anniversary, Zachary sat in the rose garden at sunset, talking to Bea as he did every evening. "I miss you," he said softly. "Every single day I miss you, but I kept my promise. I did not give up. Our family is thriving, the land is prosperous, and your roses are more beautiful than ever. I hope I made you proud." A gentle breeze rustled through the garden, carrying the sweet scent of roses, and Zachary chose to believe it was Bea's way of answering him. He lived for 10 more years, watching his family continue to grow and flourish. He saw James marry and have children of his own. He saw all of his grandchildren reach adulthood and begin families of their own. The property that he and Bea had fought so hard to keep remained in the family, worked by the 5th generation of their descendants. On a spring morning in 1935, at the age of 85, Zachary Emmett died peacefully in his sleep. It was the day the first roses of the season opened in Bea's garden, as if the flowers were welcoming him home. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people. 4 generations of his family, along with friends and neighbors, gathered to say goodbye to the man who had become a legend. They buried him beside Bea on a hillside overlooking the property they had built together, under the shade of a cottonwood tree they had planted when Thomas was born. James spoke at the funeral, his voice thick with emotion. "My father was a man who had every reason to give up on life, but he chose hope instead. He chose love. When he met my mother, they were both struggling to survive in a harsh land. But together, they did more than survive. They thrived. They created beauty where others saw only barrenness. They built a family and a legacy that will endure for generations. The greatest lesson they taught us is that love, real love, can transform everything. It can make flowers bloom in the desert and bring life to the emptiest heart." After the funeral, the family gathered at the house. Children played in the yard while adults reminisced and comforted each other. Young Beatrice, now 22 and newly married, stood in the rose garden looking at the flowers. "Tell me about them," her husband said, coming to stand beside her. "My great-grandmother planted these roses 47 years ago, even though everyone told her they would not survive. But she believed in them, and my great-grandfather believed in her. Together, they made the impossible possible. They fell in love while tending this garden, and their love lasted until death separated them. Even then, I think it lasted beyond death. Great-grandpa used to say that true love never really ends, it just changes form." She reached out and touched one of the perfect pink blooms. "These roses are proof of that. They have survived droughts and freezes, storms and sickness, just like my great-grandparents' love survived every challenge life threw at them. And they are still here, still blooming, still beautiful. That is what real love does. It endures. It transforms. It creates beauty that lasts long after we are gone." Her husband pulled her close. "I hope our love is like that someday. It will be if we tend it as carefully as they tended these roses, if we believe in it the way they believed in each other." The sun was setting over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The roses glowed in the fading light, their perfume heavy on the evening air. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied and children laughed. The property that Zachary and Bea had built together would continue for generations, passed down through their children and their children's children. The rose garden would always be maintained, a living memorial to the love that had started it all. And on spring evenings, when the flowers were in full bloom, those who knew the story swore they could sometimes see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the garden, forever together in the place where their love had first bloomed. The legacy of Zachary and Beatrice Emmett was not just land or property or even the famous roses. Their true legacy was the example they set, the proof that love, when nurtured with care and faith, could overcome anything. They had shown that barren hearts could bloom, that impossible things could grow, and that two people, working together with hope and determination, could create something that would last forever. Their love story became part of the folklore of Santa Fe, told and retold through the generations. Parents would bring their children to the memorial garden in town and tell them about the woman who refused to believe that roses could not grow in the desert, and the cowboy who learned that his heart was not as empty as he thought. It became a story about faith and hope, about the transformative power of love, about choosing to believe in beauty even when the world seems harsh and unforgiving. And every spring, when the roses bloomed in impossible profusion throughout Santa Fe and across the property that still bore the Emmett name, it was as if Zachary and Bea were reminding everyone that what they had built together was stronger than death, more enduring than stone, as eternal as the desert itself. Their story had started with a simple act of faith, a woman planting roses in barren soil. It had grown into a love that transformed both of their lives, that created a family and a legacy spanning generations. And in the end, they had proven what Bea had always believed, that with enough love, enough faith, and enough determination, even the most barren heart could bloom into something beautiful.